And this time of the pandemic, we've all lost so much. And it's so important that we have safe places to grieve supportively together, to treasure what still exists, to treasure what we remember. And these are part of the skills that I'm trying to help ensure, partly through our foundation, that we teach our youth much sooner in life.
Hello and welcome to Women of Wayland podcast, where we tell you stories of remarkable women from our small town of Wayland in Massachusetts. This episode is super special because with it, we are introducing a new category for stories called Man of Wayland. This category was introduced so we could know about men who are working to uplift our community members, especially women. A bit of a caution. We understand this is season of joy, but this story is a mix of everything. A heinous crime, sadness, grief, lifting oneself and others amid the troubled times, and setting an example in the society. So some parts of this episode can be emotionally unsettling. Our man of Wayland, Malcolm Astley, turned a personal tragedy into his life's mission to educate about and prevent teen violence. A lifelong educator, Malcolm saw a gulf in how we educate our children about teen violence. Said differently, how little guidance they are given as they enter the world of dating and take their place in the world. In recent years, Malcolm has worked tirelessly to increase state funding in Massachusetts for youth training in healthy relationships and violence prevention. He also took part in the task force that designed the state awareness campaign called Respectfully, It Starts With Us. These are just a few examples. He has pioneered this area of education with countless other initiatives. Today, Lauren Dunne Astley Memorial Fund provides the Love to Death workshop and has created an ecosystem of partners to generate awareness of the topic through books, videos, workshops, etc. Good things come in small package. Tiny, 5-foot-tall Lauren had a lot of personality and a beautiful voice. She was born to Malcolm Astley and Mary Dunne in Wayland. Her life was cut short by violence. Her ex-boyfriend Nathaniel Fujita, also known as Nate, murdered Lauren on July 3, 2011, a crime for which he was convicted and imprisoned for life. This year, 10th year of her passing, she was remembered and celebrated by her friends and family. I was a part of this celebration, and I witnessed the beautiful performance of Lauren's a cappella group that reunited to perform on this occasion. After this performance, it struck me that we had a man of Wayland standing right in front of us. After her passing, her parents started the Lauren Dunne Astley Memorial Fund to provide education about teen violence, in other words, dating and breakup violence. You know how sometimes you feel your whole life you've been preparing for something or waiting for that one moment of reckoning? When asked about how he ended up in this role and line of educator's work, Malcolm goes back to his childhood and recalls how mental health was an important topic in his family.
My background's a mixture of education and psychology. My father was a psychoanalyst. My mother was a psychiatric social worker. So I was sort of steeped in mental health questions and conversations from very early on. Most meals included some chat about that. The constant question of what makes people tick and what makes them encounter difficulties and challenges. So I was very interested in it from early on, and somehow taking school maybe a little bit too seriously, I really wanted it to work well for young people. And I went into education mainly as a a means toward preventive mental health. That was my goal. Maybe it was a competition with my father. He was seeing one patient, one client at a time, and I was trying to work with large groups of young people and their families to try to help it all come out the best it could. And there are ironies in that, of course, now in my life. But those were some of the original reasons I went into education and psychology. My doctorate is in counseling and human development. I spent a lot of time in schools, and they're sweet as they are, they're hard objects to move in any direction. It takes a lot of time and effort, but I valued it so much, even if there were a lot of challenges.
I had read a lot about Lauren, but I still wanted to know some beautiful, fond memories of her. Sometimes, even recalling those memories bring immense pain. But within that pain is a reminder that you're capable and indeed already have turned your grief into a positive force for yourself and the world. Listen to Malcolm reminisce about some fond memories of Lauren.
Much of the memories is just sweet gestures and so on. When I would go in to see her in the morning, almost instantly the little arms would be reaching up, and I loved that. And her reaching out to life. And then there was a strong independence to her as well, all the way along. And when I would put her to bed, there'd be this moment where she was sealing off the day, and she would turn away. And it was, I think, her way of controlling the night and going to sleep and what was happening to her. And she would go off to be by herself. And I admired that. And immediate part of this conversation, I knew, and you probably knew, there'll be tears flickering along. There's a lot we treasured together. She, somewhat unwilling, became part of the blueberry patch cultivation and that we have on the property here. And another one was one of the texts that I got from her. It appeared as they magically do, and it said, "I'm here, Dad." I was delighted to get a message of affirmation and pride. And where she was at a demonstration up at the temple, the Islamic Center, where she was standing with a group of youth against demonstrators who'd come to demonstrate against the mosque. And she was proud to be there and strong and wanted to share it. I was glad to get that. Overall, she would share a great deal with me, even hard things, and lean on me when something hard would happen, but not always. She was very independent too, probably a little too confident, probably a little, and that's a hard balance to get right.
As difficult as it was to listen to these beautiful, fond memories, it also got me very nostalgic. I remember confiding in my father so much. I find that as we grow and become more mature, we stop confiding in our parents. According to iloverespect.org, only 33% of teens in abusive relationships tell someone.
You provide such a clear picture of the strong ongoing connection with your father. I think my road with Lauren was a little bumpier than that, but overall, I think it was very good and strong and positive. I think this will be a bit of a puzzle to deliver to you and the other listeners. I don't think I was as alert as I would be now. And partly I want to pass on my alertness to others, as Lauren's mother is good at doing. That the most dangerous time in relationships is around breakups. Not every breakup is dangerous, but you want to be alert and be more alert early on to teach the foundation, you don't see a former partner alone. It's not your job if you decide you need to leave a partner. It's not your job to look after their needs. But the society and the communities have to have in place resources so everyone can count on the person who was left being looked after. And people need to be sensitive when they're hearing about a breakup, and are there needs there, and who can best deliver them, and to have those teams in place, because that's what humans do. They come together and they break apart. And if they don't have the skills and the tools and the backup support, there can be much more damage than there needs to be, damage and pain.
We need to reframe breaking up, Astley said at a recent summit. We need to think about it and teach our youth to talk about it differently. Ending a relationship is one of the most painful of human experiences, he said.
And this time of the pandemic, we've all lost so much. And it's so important that we have safe places to grieve supportively together, to treasure what still exists, to treasure what we remember. And these are part of the skills that I'm trying to help ensure, partly through our foundation, that we teach our youth much sooner in life. There's that first stuffed animal that gets lost for a very young child, a first goldfish that dies, and we need to help them right from the start. We moved from a house that was the world when we were very young. We move from towns. We lose a dog, a closer, friendlier pet, a grandparent. But that's the sequence that we need, I think, much more consciously to talk about, to both to treasure what we have, to be open to the wonder of our connections, and to be strong and resilient in the face of the inevitable losses.
We need to be resilient. In the book On the Brink of Everything, renowned American author and educator turns the conventional wisdom on its head to encourage old and young people alike to be creative and entrepreneurial in the face of loss and sorrow. Listen to Malcolm describe his process of grief and recovery, making it clear how deeply he adheres to this philosophy.
It goes on struggling to process it. And there's a good side to that, and then there's a very hard side to it. But the hard side is often caught up in the phrase of somehow being able to move on in a productive way, or to integrate the horror of what's happened. There's this concept of post-traumatic stress syndrome. The past stays with you more than is helpful. And I play with those ideas a lot and talk with people and with various counselors and therapists about what's involved with that, and how to disarm that horror. You know that many soldiers are said to experience such a phenomenon. But I see it as more of the human condition as I go along. And what you are trying to do in exploring what I have been through is in part your own attempts to uh, understand and encounter what the incredible equation of loss is in life, which again, and I'm starting to repeat myself now, we all face. Alan Parker Palmer, in his good book On the Brink of Everything, and I haven't read all of it, but I've read enough of it to be delighted with one of his good points. In the face of loss, we have a choice. And the choice is to let our hearts harden, uh, to let them compact and then explode into fragments that are relatively useless. Or we can choose, and this is a hard choice, and freedom or determinism has always been a tough issue for me, but the choice is you can let your heart break open, and to be more open to the incredible miracle whether you believe in God or not, the miracle of our being, the miracle of our being in proximity to others, the incredible treasures all around us all the time. And that's an important choice to remember as we face loss. It helps so much to have people around who can listen to you, who can look after you, who can offer caring to you, who can just be with you, not to do any more, but to witness what you are facing. And that way, we can keep each other incredibly more tender and incredibly more strong together and build strong communities where domination is not the avenue for achieving that sense of competence, that sense of value and effectiveness, but instead it is a way of building each other together instead of having to be above someone else, which feeds all, to me, of the isms, and feeds many males as they try to cope with rejection and end up lashing out to stay in control, which we have to help them loosen up on. And by the way, to learn what real control is, which is to be on the same level together and building together.
Lauren Dunne Astley Memorial Fund educates teens about many at risk emotions. Shame is perhaps the most important of them. Often, as described by Brené Brown, people think of themselves as mistake, not as having made the mistake. This emotion cuts across all sorts of isms, as Malcolm talks about, and often shows up in breakups. Emotions can be consuming. One of the things that I really wanted to ask Malcolm was, how did he cope up with the grief and decide that he wanted to do something in Lauren's memory? Because I know grief doesn't follow a linear path.
It didn't come at a single moment. And as I've already described a bit from my point of view, and people are quite different about these things, but my grief was a terror at first, and it can still rise up that way, a reaching out for something so dear that's gone, which we all, again, gradually get to experience. The pain was almost physical for the first number of weeks, as if my limbs had been ripped from my body. But there was not one point. I was talking with one of the prosecutors, the state prosecutors, within days of Lauren's murder, and a state senator was kind enough to come and say, "What do you think needs to be done, Malcolm, to help prevent this kind of event?" So the wheels were already turning that way, and partly, again, it rested on my education and my efforts to educate from decades. So that structure was already in place, and it was sort of an automatic response. We have a problem here, and what caused it, what led to it, and how can we work on prevention. I had done numbers of initiatives in that kind of regard, against racism, against sexism, against lots of isms. And again, this whole situation has been an opportunity to examine those. I think there are many common themes through the isms, and it goes back again to shame and to people striving to feel valued. Each of us wants to be seen as effective and lovable. That old phrase from someone's great socio-emotional curriculum, I am lovable and capable, it was called, and ILAC for short. And The when we don't feel that way, pain can seep in, and someone recently used the term corrosive shame. We need a certain amount of shame to become civilized, but it's very easy for it to get out of hand. An emotion, I call it one of the at-risk emotions, and there may be 12 of them that I think we need to do a much better job of focusing on helping our young people understand them, to name them, and to know how to cope with them, both in themselves and in others. And shame is one of the major ones, as I've already touched on in the story of Cain and Abel. And it shows up in breakups. I believe it was operating in my daughter's death.
Do you think, along with the kids, the adults should also be given some sort of a training in understanding the signs, finding the resources, and how to communicate with a child who is showing signs of distress and dating woes?
In terms of my just specific tools and so on, yeah, I try to approach both groups. I think approaching young parents early on about these matters is a very important road we can go down together, of trying to provide opportunities for them to understand these matters and begin working on them very early, as we said, with that first stuffed animal that's lost. And we want to train young parents to begin talking about these matters as soon as children can talk. But it's also about consent or not, which is nonverbal. It's all happens very from the beginning, and what respect is acted out physically, and later on verbally. So it's relying on and training very young parents at first, and then working with preschool teachers and parents together, and gradually moving it along. What I've said is, with our approach, we're trying to build a skyscraper from the roof on down. That doesn't work very well, but it's what we can do for now. So our curriculum is aimed at one high school class period, the Love to Death curriculum, aimed at juniors, and escalation developed by the One Love Foundation. They tried to develop it for college and university students who affirmed it, but said we needed to hear it before we got here. So that's been largely moved down to seniors in high school, even though it's still used at the college level also. And we have some other tools that can be used at the high school level, but down through middle school, a good little comic book that's free online called Chris and Neela.
Videos, stories, comics, Love to Death workshop. All these methods are wonderful and work efficiently in conveying the message. One thing that has really intrigued me whenever I switch on the TV and watch any sports is the aggressiveness of the sports. I asked Malcolm about what the role of macro factors such as win-lose culture in sports in school and even life in general in our society has on the work of Lauren Dunne Astley Memorial Fund. Malcolm is quick and on point to recognize the impact of this culture on men and other genders too. He underlines the importance of not winning, but rather being resilient, meaning adjusting, adapting, and being productive in new environments. That resilience, perhaps, should be foundational in our education because crisis will always come and go.
Back to our search to feel competent and valued. If a loss means a lack of value, then that creature of over shame can appear, and lead to a major destabilization, a major weakening of our sense of resilience. Resilience is the ability, I think, to come to a new situation and adapt to it as is necessary, to look after yourself, to look after others around you, to be productive. But if your core is being defined by by winning and losing, which sports easily can tend to cultivate, then we're in real trouble whenever there's a loss. And the whole concept of being a loser has major impact in our culture at this time. But underneath it is that lovely striving to be competent and to be seen as valuable. And if we can get those out in the open and identify the many ways that people can be competent and be valued and value each other, and it leaves, I think, males in many cases vulnerable. And for the many genders that we're now finally becoming aware of, these things get much more complicated. But still, the idea that you need to feel competent within yourself, have good resources, know that there will be continuing identity crises, but that you can learn to cope with and face up to. Those are some of the things that I think can help boys break out of, as Tony Porter says, break out of the man box, which keeps boys and men tightly isolated.
What made Malcolm hug Fujita's parents in the courtroom after they announced his conviction? How did he gather that strength and empathy for them? This question kept haunting me all night right before the interview, and I asked him that.
It's not easy to come to a simple answer on that. It was my way of trying to affirm caring and comfort amidst incredible damage and harm and loss. And again, if I'm looking back, and I hadn't read Parker Palmer's account at that time, but it was a way of trying to keep the heart open and to stay alive, to caring, which is, I think, a much firmer foundation than dominance and denigration of others and having power over them.
And his answers were the exact reason why we had him as our first story in our Man of Wayland format. I hope as a host I did justice to the message that Malcolm is spreading, which is to educate our youth regarding healthy relationships and violence prevention. Every year, Lauren Dunne Astley Memorial Fund offers mini grant program during the holidays to fund small projects in 3 areas: effective teen relationships and violence prevention, the arts, and community service. It also sponsored the production of 2 seasons of our podcast. They not only validated our work by providing financial support, but also helped us find a strong footing in the world of women's storytelling. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts for their support. Have a wonderful holiday and a very happy new year. See you all next year with new stories, new formats, and lots of exciting surprises. This is your host Yamini, and you were listening to Season 3 finale of Women of Wayland, the podcast.